Hello and welcome to our presentation about the topic information behavior in Corona times, and welcome to today's Intercultural Perspectives on Information Literacy conference. We are student group A consisting of Büsra, Ria, Neha, Atharva and Daniela, and we are from Hildesheim, Germany and from Pune, India.
In the first part of the presentation, we will introduce the topic and along with that, we will discuss the general aspects involved in the topic. In the second part, we will talk about the research. In that, we will cover the inference and impact of this pandemic on information behavior. In the third aspect of this presentation, we will cover the intercultural perspectives. In that, we have covered interview questions that we had prepared for the interviews, the overall opinions of the interviewee, and local aspects and cultural differences. And along with that, we will also see the improvements in the section. And lastly, we will conclude the presentation by discussing the findings that we had found during the entire research journey.
COVID 19. The ongoing pandemic has created havoc amongst the masses and uncertainty when no one knew what the future would be. The whole world had come under this dreadful disease and everything came to a terrifying standstill. As equipped that we are with the technology, the reliance on the same increased. Where everything has to be done online, whether it is gaining information, attending or taking classes, so on and so forth. Where there was a growing pandemic outside, there was a slow poison spreading on the inside, injected through the media to the masses, creating anxiety, fear, and ambiguity of what is going to happen next. Individuals started raising questions as if these news are credible or authentic enough to trust. Should they rely on what is being told online? When the news was being repetitive and no one knew what can be next, the media tried to divert the audience by focusing more on other issues, which either were baseless or out of context. To be specific here, social media does have the power to either make or break things.
This pandemic has put an emphasis on credible information in an age of spams and fake news overflowing on informal social media platforms. For example, in India, there were a lot of fake news on how there is no need to wear a mask or socially distance that seemed to be certified by WHO. Credible information became the need of the hour and forced citizens to re examine their patterns of information consumption. This paper analyzes those patterns and behaviors that have evolved throughout this pandemic. We thus explored how people perceived information and its credibility by preparing a questionnaire and interviewing few individuals belonging to different age groups. The quick spread of the novel coronavirus disease has disrupted life across the globe. The level of trust in sources of information also played an important role in motivating the engagement in self protective behaviors. Consumers have also shown increased interest in content hosted by government sites, whether that it is the latest number of COVID 19 positive cases or the most updated guidelines to be followed. Governments used mass media, print media, and the internet to mobilize the community, convey precautionary measures to the people, and inform them about the supportive measures and channels. The content available from these sources amplified the risk of perceptions and fear, especially when individuals cannot discern between real and fake news, adversely affecting the mental health and well being of the masses.
To understand our selected topic better, we turn to the biggest asset one has in this age, the internet. We looked for credible articles and academic essays on information behavior and consumption during COVID to better understand the available information as well as to get a sense of direction for our topic. These research papers helped us track the inevitable changes in information consumption behavior rushed in by the pandemic. Information became absolutely necessary for survival, and yet the digital era also produced what the World Health Organization called the infodemic. It became absolutely necessary to ensure credibility of sources. This caused people to not only heavily rely on media sources and form a new bond with information, but learn to criticize information and to understand it beyond the absolution associated with it.
In the study, Emotional Responses and Self-Protective Behavior within days of the COVID-19 outbreak, conducted in Slovenia, a study was conducted to understand the usage of different information portals among 1,718 participants. The study showed that the most relied upon source was online news portal, followed by television news, social media, and the official webpage of NIPH. Interestingly, radio and healthcare professionals were deemed to be the least reliable. Another study titled Information Behavior During the COVID-19 Crisis in German-speaking countries explored the insights of 308 participants from German-speaking countries, namely Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. The study was administered through an online survey and revealed an increased demand for reliable information, public satisfaction with information supply, and an occasional feeling of information overload, which consequently led to a voluntary reduction in seeking information and use of media.
The scientific data we used for our research also presented the big impact the pandemic has on people's life and on people's mental health, as well as on their information behavior. While the pandemic taught people to broaden their perspectives towards information, as well as being smart about relying on information, they also widened one's resources and learned to be critical of the information which is presented to them. This causes an increased demand for reliable and credible information. While the amount of COVID-19 cases was increasing very fast, people's anxiety and worries also started to increase a lot. People also reported that they were being overwhelmed by information consumption. During the lockdown, information became the key to understand how our world looks and will look, but it also became something troublesome. The patterns seem to vary between consuming overwhelming amounts of information to complete information avoidance as the world started to grow grimmer during the pandemic. This information overflow is causing impact on people's mental health, like anxiety, for example. The pandemic also increased the demand for mental health services because the impact of people's mental health started to grow. Triggers for mental health conditions, according to the World Health Organization, shortly WHO, are bereavement, isolation, loss of income, and overall fear. Also, it was reported that increased levels of alcohol and drug use, insomnia, and anxiety occur. The possible neurological and mental complications are delirium, agitation, and stroke. Also, pre-existing mental and neurological disorders are more vulnerable to a COVID-19 infection than others. All in all, due to this increase in information consumption, people reported an increase in their anxiety as well as demotivation to function due to being unable to find a balance. To sum up everything, we provided a conclusion of our literature analysis. You can say that there is an increased demand for reliable information. Also, the participants of the studies are satisfied with the information supply they're getting during the crisis. The participants also have the feelings of information overloads. In general, people trust scientists the most, followed by their general practitioners. Also, perceived credibility of news relayed by medical professionals and scientists is linked to lower negative emotions and higher subjective knowledge of self-protective behaviors.
Next, we wanted to talk about the intercultural perspective. Since the coronavirus is not an epidemic, that means the occurrence of an infectious disease is in a certain limited area of distribution. It is currently affecting the whole world and for this reason a pandemic. Thus, cross-cultural aspects are important clues that can provide interesting results when looked at more closely. Challenges, as well as various differences in different areas of the globe, could be identified through the media. These differences can be seen in the very different handling of lockdown in countries around the world. Interviews with fellow people were conducted to gather appropriate information. For this purpose, various questions were asked on the general topic of information behavior in coronavirus, as well as intercultural aspect and suggestions for improvement. Additionally, 6 questions were grouped into a question catalogue and used in each case. The questions were as followed. First, what kind of changes have you seen in your information consumption throughout the period of the lockdown, especially in your culture or country? Second, how did your credibility and distrust towards information developed in the past year? Third, what are different attitudes and patterns that you have noticed towards information and its consumption within your family and close friends? Fourth, were there any challenges that you had to face in perceiving information during such times? How did it affect your mental health? Fifth, what kind of differences have you seen around the pandemic and information about it with respect to other cultures? Compare with the situation from your friend or relative's perspective who might be in another country. 6. Do you have any ideas to improve the information behavior? What measures, according to you, are essential to employ while consuming information? For the interviews, persons between 20 and 60 were interviewed from the countries Germany and India. To add, most of the professions were students, teachers, or secretaries. Regarding the general opinions, it can be said that the information behavior changed and developed. For this reason, according to the interviewees, information consumption has increased significantly among friends and family, and they are in a constant search for credible and ultimate informations. Questions like, when is the end of Corona? When can we go back to our old life? Are very common. Since the social context had to be reduced to a minimum, social media is also used significantly more. To add, there is less reliance on mainstream media and distrust towards mainstream media. People no longer believe everything directly. It was mentioned that there is no trust in news media anymore because there were too many unclear and partly contradictory news. They believe that there were too many allegations but no accurate evidence. Besides, there is a communalization of the pandemic. Moreover, one interviewee, a teacher, added that you can learn different techniques to not let the education of young minds suffer during this crisis. So there were various opportunities, seminars to gain information and learn to adapt this lifestyle. Lastly, it was mentioned that there is an information overload and consequently anxiety and fear increased. When asked about challenges during this time and the effect on the health, it was said that they have become much more frightened. Their self-confidence has decreased and they have physical issues from being at home, for example, from home office or online semester. If you take a closer look at the local aspects, they explained that there was kind of agitation in the German news media and split in society. They added that learning about different cultures and seeking information about other countries virtually was a common behavior. Important is also that all the generations seem to be in a frenzy and accepting all sorts of fake news. This aspect was also mentioned in the Indian interviews. In the interviews of the Indian research participants, the following were mentioned in particular. On the one hand, the aspect sensationalization of the pandemic, which was reported in India. On the other hand, they stated that it led to distrust towards the mainstream media sources in their country. Many people tend to believe in word of mouth, and they believe that other countries' mainstream media to be more ethical. This point is also covered in the German interviews. So how can all these points be improved? The interviewees indicated a wide variety of aspects from more verified official sources to introducing positive news, for example, how many people recovered, or other topics in news media. To add, it was mentioned that rules could be introduced like government restrictions so that they only allow news to appear with important messages or has been confirmed by them or a higher level institution like Robert Koch Institute in Germany. Another point was transparency in terms of sharing information. The last point was positive thinking, outdoor walks and meditation to overcome fear and strengthen the mental health. In summary, it can be said that people gather information from different sources, especially from online news portals, television, news, and social media. The dependence over media increased during the pandemic, and there is a huge need for reliable, credible information. A concentration on psychological impact is very important, and there is also a need for factoring in information overload and its impact on the discourse of mental health. The perception of how information gets manipulated, like fake news, is a big aspect. Furthermore, individuals looked for the authenticity of the website before consuming any knowledge. It was also mentioned that individuals' level of information anxiety has a significant impact on the level of information avoidance, and that improvements like positive news or government restrictions can be introduced. For future projects, the following questions were combined. First, what are further developments and impacts? Second, how will information seeking and trust behavior develop in the future? Third, according to which criteria are individuals going to choose their further information sources in the future of crisis? Fourth, how can one curtail the reach of misinformation on popular social media platforms in the future? And lastly, how can one find a balance between mental health and seeking information? Lastly, we prepared some take-home advices. So, be aware of your information consumption. Be conscious of reliable and credible information. Be careful regarding fake news and their sources. Be mindful of your body and mind during the pandemic. Be informed about different sources for information search. Be sensible of consuming more positive news provided by authentic sources. Here you can see our resources. Thank you for your attention.